Sergeant Marcus Chen had seen enough alien worlds to know when he was walking into trouble. The crystalline spires of Zephyria Prime gleamed like frozen lightning against the purple sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 suns in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. He adjusted his helmet's polarization filter and continued his patrol along the perimeter of the diplomatic compound. The peace talks between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire had been going on for 6 months now, ever since humanity had accidentally stumbled into their territory while fleeing the Korthak invasion. What had started as a desperate request for sanctuary had turned into something more complex when the Zephyrians realized that humans possessed something they had never encountered before: the ability to survive and adapt in environments that would kill most other species. Marcus paused at Checkpoint 7, scanning the alien landscape beyond the energy barriers. The Zephyrians had been gracious hosts, providing a secure facility for the negotiations, but he could feel the tension in the air. Not everyone in the Empire was happy about sharing their space with what they considered primitive mammals. Movement on the East Quadrant, came the voice of Corporal Williams through his comm. Looks like we've got company. Marcus turned to see a small group approaching from the main complex. 3 figures glided rather than walked, their movements fluid and graceful in a way that made human locomotion seem clumsy by comparison. At the center of the group was someone Marcus recognized from the intelligence briefings: Princess Lirelai, daughter of Empress Valdris and heir to the Zephyrian throne. The princess was tall even by Zephyrian standards, easily 7 feet in height, with the characteristic blue-silver skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Her elongated limbs moved with predatory grace, and her large, multifaceted eyes reflected the world around her in countless tiny mirrors. Most striking were the delicate, translucent fins that extended from her skull and down her neck, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that indicated her emotional state. As the group approached, Marcus could see that the princess's fins were glowing with the orange-red patterns he had learned indicated amusement, mixed with disdain. Not a good combination when dealing with Zephyrian nobility. "Stand down, Sergeant," Princess Lirelai called out in accented but perfect English. Her voice had the musical quality common to her species, but there was an edge to it that made Marcus's instincts prickle. "I wish to examine the specimens that my mother has so graciously allowed to contaminate our world." The 2 Zephyrian guards flanking her stiffened at her words, their own bioluminescent patterns flickering with what Marcus interpreted as embarrassment. Even among aliens, it seemed, there were those who understood the concept of diplomatic courtesy. Marcus remained at attention, his rifle held in a non-threatening but ready position. "Your Highness," he replied evenly, "I'm afraid this area is restricted during patrol hours. If you'd like to schedule a tour of our facilities, I'd be happy to put you in touch with our diplomatic staff." Princess Lirelai's fins flared brighter, and she let out a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so obviously mocking. How delightfully quaint. "The little mammal thinks it can dictate terms to me." She moved closer, her guards following at a respectful distance. "Tell me, Sergeant. Chen, is it? Do you truly believe your primitive species belongs among the stars?" Marcus had dealt with his share of hostile aliens, but there was something particularly grating about the princess's attitude. It wasn't just xenophobia, it was the kind of casual superiority that came from never having faced real adversity. "Ma'am, humanity has been exploring space for over 2 centuries. We've colonized dozens of worlds and made contact with 17 different species. I'd hardly call that primitive." 17 species, the princess repeated, her voice dripping with condescension. "How impressive. The Zephyrian Empire has diplomatic relations with over 3,000 species across 47 galaxies. Your entire civilization could fit comfortably in one of our minor trade ports." She circled him slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "I've read the reports about your kind, Sergeant. You live for barely a century. You require a narrow range of environmental conditions to survive, and your technology is so crude that you still use projectile weapons." Her gaze fixed on his rifle with obvious disdain. What possible value could such limited beings offer to an advanced civilization? Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "Respectfully, Your Highness, our primitive weapons and tactics were effective enough to hold off the Korthak, long enough for our evacuation fleets to escape. From what I understand, the Korthak have been giving your empire trouble for quite some time." The princess's fins darkened to a deep crimson, a color Marcus had learned indicated anger. The Korthak are a temporary inconvenience, nothing more. The fact that your species managed to delay them briefly before fleeing like cowards hardly constitutes a victory. We saved over 50 million civilians, Marcus replied, his own temper starting to fray. We held the line for 3 days against odds of 1,000 to 1, buying time for the evacuation ships to reach safe distance. We didn't flee, Your Highness. We made a tactical withdrawal after completing our mission. Princess Lirelei stopped directly in front of him, her multifaceted eyes reflecting his image dozens of times over. How noble. And now you come crawling to us for protection, expecting us to risk our own people for the sake of a few million refugees from a failed species. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Perhaps it would be more merciful to simply hand you over to the Korthak and spare you the slow extinction that awaits all primitive races. Marcus's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't move. Years of military discipline held him in check, even as every instinct screamed at him to respond to the threat. Is that an official position of the Zephyrian government, Your Highness? It's my personal opinion, she replied with a smile that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. But I am my mother's heir, and my opinions have a way of becoming policy. Before Marcus could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk.
Lirelei. All heads turned to see Empress Valdris approaching from the direction of the main complex.
Where her daughter was tall and predatory, the Empress moved with the fluid grace of deep water, her ancient eyes holding depths that spoke of centuries of wisdom and experience. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed with the steady, controlled rhythm that indicated complete emotional mastery. Mother, Princess Lirelei said, her fins immediately shifting to more subdued colors. I was simply acquainting myself with our guests. The Empress's gaze moved from her daughter to Marcus, and he found himself fighting the urge to step back. There was something in those ancient eyes that suggested she saw far more than she revealed. Sergeant Chen, I trust my daughter has not been causing any diplomatic incidents? Marcus considered his words carefully. No incidents, Your Majesty. We were just having a discussion about interspecies cooperation. A sound that might have been amusement rippled through the Empress's throat. Indeed. Lirelei, perhaps you would join me for the afternoon session? The human delegation has some interesting proposals regarding their defensive capabilities. As the royal party departed, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something significant. The way the Empress had looked at him, as if measuring him for some purpose he couldn't fathom, suggested that this encounter was far from over. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Marcus was reviewing patrol schedules when Admiral Rodriguez burst into the security briefing room, her face grim with the kind of expression that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Listen up, people, she announced to the assembled human staff. We just received word from our deep space monitors. The Korthak have found us. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the implications hit home. They had bought themselves 6 months of relative safety, but apparently that was all they were going to get. How long do we have? Asked Captain Morrison, the head of the diplomatic security detail. 72 hours, maybe less, Admiral Rodriguez replied. 3 Korthak battle fleets, approximately 1,500 ships total. They're moving at maximum sublight speed, which means they're not planning on taking prisoners this time. The room erupted in quiet conversations as officers began calculating evacuation scenarios and defensive positions. Marcus found himself thinking about the 50 million refugees currently scattered across Zephyrian colony worlds, most of them civilian families who had already lost everything once. What's the Zephyrian response? Morrison asked. Admiral Rodriguez's expression grew even grimmer. That's where things get complicated. The Empress has called an emergency session of their High Council. They're debating whether to honor the protection agreement or turn us over to the Korthak. To avoid a direct confrontation, Marcus remembered Princess Lirelei's words from the day before and felt a chill run down his spine. Maybe her threat hadn't been as idle as he had hoped. The princess seems to favor the latter option, Admiral Rodriguez continued, confirming his fears. She's arguing that humanity isn't worth the risk of war with the Korthak, especially since we can't meaningfully contribute to the Empire's defense. Captain Morrison stood up, his chair scraping against the metal floor. Begging your pardon, Admiral, but that's complete nonsense. Our people have been pulling double shifts helping with their infrastructure projects. And our engineers have solved 3 major technical problems that their scientists had been working on for decades. I know that, Captain. You know that. But Princess Lyrelei doesn't seem to care about our non-military contributions. Admiral Rodriguez activated the holographic display in the center of the room, showing a tactical map of the local star systems. She's convinced the High Council that humans are a liability that will only draw Korthak attention to Zephyrian space. Marcus studied the display, noting the defensive positions of the Zephyrian fleet. It was an impressive force, but the Korthak had numbers on their side and their technology was roughly equivalent to the Zephyrians. In a straight fight, it would be bloody for both sides. What about our own assets, he asked. The refugee fleet still have their military escorts. Admiral Rodriguez zoomed in on a section of the map. 18 destroyers, 6 cruisers, and 1 battle carrier, against 1,500 Korthak ships. She paused to let that sink in. We'd last about 30 minutes in open combat. The math was brutal but simple. Humanity's remaining military forces were barely a rounding error compared to what was coming for them. Their only hope lay in convincing the Zephyrians to honor their protection agreement, and right now that seemed about as likely as the Korthak developing a sudden fondness for peace negotiations. There is one other factor to consider, Admiral Rodriguez said, her tone shifting to something Marcus couldn't quite identify. According to our intelligence reports, Princess Lyrelei has never actually seen human military doctrine in action. Her opinions about our combat effectiveness are based entirely on theoretical analysis and statistical comparisons. Captain Morrison raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Admiral? I'm not suggesting anything, Captain. I'm simply pointing out that the Princess might benefit from a more practical demonstration of human capabilities. Marcus felt a slow smile spreading across his face as he began to understand what the Admiral was really saying. What kind of demonstration did you have in mind, ma'am? Before Admiral Rodriguez could answer, an alarm began sounding throughout the complex. The distinctive pattern indicated an incoming priority transmission from Zephyrian High Command. Speak of the devil, Morrison muttered as they all turned toward the main communication screen. The image that appeared showed Empress Valdris in what was clearly the High Council chamber, her bioluminescent patterns controlled but tense. Behind her, Marcus could see dozens of other Zephyrian officials, their own patterns creating a chaotic light show that suggested heated debate. Admiral Rodriguez, the Empress began without preamble. The High Council has reached a preliminary decision regarding the Korthak situation. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he waited for the verdict that would determine the fate of his species. We have agreed to honor our protection agreement, the Empress continued, and Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. However, there are conditions. Of course there were conditions. There were always conditions. The Council requires a demonstration that humanity can contribute meaningfully to the defense of this system, the Empress explained. Princess Lyrelei has volunteered to oversee a combat simulation that will test human tactical capabilities against simulated Korthak forces. On the screen, Marcus caught a glimpse of the princess standing behind her mother, her fins glowing with what he now recognized as smug satisfaction. She had maneuvered the situation perfectly, putting humanity in a position where they had to prove themselves worthy of protection. The simulation will take place in 8 hours, the Empress continued. Failure to demonstrate adequate combat effectiveness will result in the immediate termination of our protection agreement. The transmission ended, leaving the human command staff in stunned silence. Well, Admiral Rodriguez said after a moment, it looks like we're going to get that demonstration after all. Marcus was already running calculations in his head. 8 hours wasn't much time to prepare, but it might be enough if they played their cards right. The princess expected to see humans fail spectacularly, proving her point about their supposed inadequacy. She was about to learn why underestimating human determination was a mistake that most species only made once. Admiral, he said, stepping forward, I'd like to volunteer for the simulation team. Captain Morrison looked at him sharply. Sergeant, this isn't a patrol mission. This is a tactical simulation that could determine the survival of our entire species. With respect, sir, that's exactly why I want to be there. Marcus met his commanding officer's gaze steadily. The princess thinks we're primitive cowards who got lucky against the Korthak. I'd like the opportunity to show her what human soldiers are really capable of. Admiral Rodriguez studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly.
Very well, Sergeant.
But understand that this isn't about personal pride or settling scores with an arrogant alien princess. This is about proving that humanity deserves to survive. Marcus straightened to attention. Understood, ma'am. I won't let you down. As the briefing broke up and officers scattered to begin preparations, Marcus found himself thinking about Princess Lyrale's mocking words. She had dismissed human military capabilities based on incomplete data and prejudiced assumptions. In 8 hours, she was going to learn why that was a very dangerous mistake to make when dealing with the species that had fought its way from the caves of Earth to the stars themselves. The Zephyrian combat simulation facility was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Holographic projectors lined every surface of the massive spherical chamber, creating a three-dimensional battlefield that was indistinguishable from reality. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy fields that could simulate everything from gravitational anomalies to electromagnetic interference. Princess Lyrale stood at the observation platform, flanked by a dozen Zephyrian military advisors, whose bioluminescent patterns betrayed their skepticism about the upcoming demonstration. Her own fins glowed with anticipation, the colors shifting between the orange of amusement and the deep blue of intellectual curiosity. Welcome to the Nexus Chamber. Humans, she announced as Marcus and his 5-person team took their positions at the control stations. This facility is capable of simulating any combat scenario with perfect accuracy, including enemy tactics, weapon capabilities, and environmental hazards. Marcus nodded acknowledgement while studying the holographic displays that surrounded his station. The interface was alien but intuitive, responding to his thoughts and gestures with fluid precision. He could see virtual representations of Korthak vessels materializing in the distance, their distinctive black and crimson hulls bristling with weapons. The scenario is simple, Princess Lyrale continued, her voice carrying that familiar note of condescension. You will command a mixed fleet of human and Zephyrian vessels against a Korthak force of equivalent size. Victory conditions require either the destruction of 70% of enemy forces or the successful defense of the primary objective. For 30 minutes, she gestured to a holographic representation of a space station that appeared
the center of the battlefield.
That station contains 10 million civilian refugees. Failure to protect them results in automatic mission failure, regardless of enemy casualties inflicted. Marcus felt his jaw tighten as he realized what the princess was really testing. It wasn't just their combat effectiveness. It was their willingness to sacrifice military assets to protect civilians. She was trying to force them into an impossible choice between tactical victory and humanitarian responsibility. Understood, Your Highness, he replied evenly. What are the fleet compositions? A series of holographic ships appeared around the station, clearly marked with human and Zephyrian identification codes. Marcus counted 12 human destroyers, 8 Zephyrian cruisers, and 4 heavy battleships from both species. Against them, twice as many Korthak vessels were beginning their approach. The enemy force includes 48 assault vessels, 16 heavy cruisers, and 8 dreadnoughts, Princess Lyrale announced. Their tactical doctrine emphasizes overwhelming firepower and coordinated assault patterns. Standard Zephyrian defensive strategies would position the heaviest ships in a protective shell around the station, while using lighter vessels for harassment and reconnaissance. Marcus studied the enemy formation and felt a familiar calm settle over him. This was what he had trained for his entire military career. The moment when superior numbers met superior tactics, and the outcome depended on who could adapt faster to changing circumstances. Begin simulation, Princess Lyrale commanded. The Korthak fleet immediately began accelerating toward the station, their ships moving in the precise geometric formations that had made them so effective against conventional opponents. Marcus watched their approach for exactly 30 seconds, analyzing their deployment pattern and identifying the assumptions built into their tactical doctrine. Then he began issuing orders that made every Zephyrian in the observation deck lean forward in surprise. All human destroyers, implement dispersal pattern Delta 7. Zephyrian cruisers maintain defensive perimeter but prepare for rapid redeployment. Battleships from both fleets, full power to engines and prepare for emergency burn. The simulated human vessels immediately broke formation, scattering across the battlefield in what appeared to be a panicked retreat. The Zephyrian ships remained in their protective formation around the station, But Marcus could see confusion in the movement patterns as their AI commanders tried to understand what the humans were doing. Princess Lyrelai's fins darkened with disapproval. "Sergeant Chen, your destroyers are abandoning their defensive positions. The Korthak will break through your lines within minutes." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied without taking his eyes off the tactical display. "They certainly will." The Korthak fleet pressed their attack, their commanders clearly pleased with what they interpreted as immediate human capitulation. Their formation tightened as they closed with the station, concentrating their firepower for what they expected to be a quick and decisive victory. That was when Marcus sprang his trap. "All ships, execute Operation Hornet's Nest now." The scattered human destroyers suddenly reversed course, their engines burning at maximum power as they dove straight into the flanks and rear of the Korthak formation. At the same moment, the Zephyrian battleships abandoned their defensive positions and charged directly at the enemy's center, their massive guns opening fire at point-blank range. The Korthak fleet, caught completely off guard by the suicidal-seeming attack, tried to maintain their original formation while responding to threats from multiple directions. Their precise geometric arrangement, designed for maximum offensive efficiency, became a liability as ships collided with each other, trying to bring weapons to bear on the rapidly moving human vessels. Marcus's destroyers darted between the larger enemy ships like angry insects, their smaller size and superior maneuverability, allowing them to strike at weapon emplacements and engine clusters before disappearing into the confusion of the larger battle. Each ship operated independently, following general tactical guidelines rather than rigid formations, adapting to changing circumstances with the kind of creative improvisation that was uniquely human. "Impossible," breathed one of the Zephyrian military advisors. "They're fighting without coordination, without proper formation discipline. It should be chaos." "It is chaos," Princess Lyrelai replied, but her voice had lost its mocking tone. "But they're making it work somehow." Marcus allowed himself a tight smile as he watched the tactical display. The Korthak fleet was beginning to fragment as individual ship commanders tried to respond to threats that appeared and disappeared faster than their targeting systems could track. The rigid command structure that made them so effective against conventional opponents was proving to be a weakness when faced with human tactical flexibility. Zephyrian cruisers, begin hunting pattern Alpha 3. Target enemy command vessels, he ordered. Human destroyers maintain harassment protocols but watch for the breakout attempt. Sure enough, the Korthak dreadnoughts were beginning to pull back, trying to establish a new formation outside the chaotic melee that the battle had become. But Marcus had anticipated this move, and his scattered destroyers were already in position to intercept them. The simulation continued for another 20 minutes, with the Korthak fleet slowly but steadily losing cohesion, as human tactics proved impossible to counter with conventional responses. Ships that tried to pursue the darting human destroyers found themselves isolated and surrounded by Zephyrian heavy units. Ships that ignored the harassment found their sensors blinded and their weapons disabled by precisely targeted strikes. When the final enemy vessel was destroyed, the simulation chamber fell silent except for the hum of the holographic projectors powering down. Princess Lyrelai stared at the tactical display for a long moment, her bioluminescent pattern cycling through colors that Marcus had never seen before. Finally, she turned to face him directly. "Explain to me what just happened, Sergeant Chen," she said quietly. "Your tactics violated every principle of sound military doctrine. You abandoned defensive positions, split your forces in the face of superior numbers, and ordered direct attacks against overwhelming odds. By all logical analysis, your fleet should have been annihilated in the first 10 minutes. Marcus straightened to attention, but he couldn't quite suppress the satisfaction in his voice when he replied, "With respect, Your Highness, those principles assume that your enemy will respond predictably to conventional tactics. Humans learned a long time ago that when you're outnumbered and outgunned, your only advantage is the willingness to do something your enemy doesn't expect." The princess's fins rippled with what might have been confusion or grudging respect. "And this is how your species has survived for 2 centuries among the stars? By refusing to follow established tactical doctrine?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "We've survived by making our own doctrine and changing it every time someone figures out how to counter it." The observation deck remained silent for several minutes after Marcus's explanation. Princess Lirelai studied the replay of the battle on her personal display, her fins cycling through complex patterns that suggested deep thought, mixed with something that might have been amazement. "Run it again," she finally announced. "Same parameters, but adjust the Korthak fleet composition. Add more light cruisers and reduce the number of dreadnoughts. I want to see if this was simply a fortunate exploitation of a specific tactical weakness." Marcus nodded and reset his station. Over the next 4 hours, they ran 17 different scenarios. The princess continuously adjusted enemy forces, terrain, and victory conditions, each time expecting to find the limitation that would expose human tactics as fundamentally flawed. Each time, Marcus and his team found a way to win. They fought in asteroid fields where conventional formations were impossible, using debris as weapons and cover in ways that no other species had ever attempted. They defended convoys while outnumbered 3-1, turning the civilian ships themselves into tactical assets by coordinating their movements to create confusion and false targets. They even won a scenario where they started with only half their ships operational, using damaged vessels as kamikaze weapons, while the functional units exploited the chaos. By the end of the 4th hour, the Zephyrian military advisors had stopped whispering among themselves and were leaning forward to study every human tactical decision. Their bioluminescent patterns had shifted from skepticism to intense fascination, and several were taking detailed notes on their personal recording devices. "Enough," Princess Lirelai said finally, her voice carrying a note of exhaustion that hadn't been there at the beginning. "I think we have sufficient data to make our assessment." She turned to face Marcus directly, and he was surprised to see that her fins had settled into the steady blue-green pattern that indicated respectful attention. "Sergeant Chen, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your species based on incomplete information and personal prejudice. That was unworthy of someone in my position." Marcus blinked in surprise. Based on everything he had observed about Zephyrian culture, admitting error in front of subordinates was considered a significant loss of face. The fact that the princess was doing so publicly suggested that the simulation had affected her more deeply than he had expected. "Your Highness, no apology is necessary," he replied diplomatically. "You were evaluating new information and making decisions based on the data available to you. That's what good leaders do." Princess Lirelai's fins flashed with what he now recognized as bitter amusement. Good leaders also recognize when their data is insufficient and seek additional information before making critical decisions. "I did neither." She paused, studying the tactical displays one more time. "Tell me, Sergeant, is this level of tactical innovation typical among human military units?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Every human soldier is trained to think independently and adapt to changing circumstances. We learn standard procedures, but we're also taught that those procedures are guidelines, not absolute rules. In combat, the situation can change so quickly that following a rigid plan often means getting killed. And your commanders encourage this kind of creative interpretation of orders?" "Within limits, yes, ma'am. A good human officer gives his people objectives and the resources to achieve them, then trusts them to figure out the best way to get the job done." Marcus gestured toward the tactical display. "What you saw today wasn't special tactics or secret weapons. It was just human soldiers doing what we've always done, improvising solutions when the textbook answers aren't good enough." One of the Zephyrian military advisors stepped forward, his patterns indicating formal deference mixed with curiosity. "Your Highness, if I may ask the human a question?" Princess Lirelai nodded permission, and the advisor turned to Marcus. "Sergeant, your species has been spacefaring for only 2 centuries. Yet your tactical doctrine appears to be more advanced than races with millennia of experience. How is this possible?" Marcus thought about how to explain humanity's history, without sounding boastful or dismissive of other species' accomplishments. "Sir, humans have been fighting wars for our entire recorded history. We've never had a period of extended peace like many species experience once they achieve interstellar travel. That's both a blessing and a curse. It means we're very good at war, but it also means we've never really learned how to stop fighting." The advisor's fins rippled with what Marcus interpreted as shocked comprehension. "You mean your species continued to wage war against itself even after achieving spaceflight?" "Yes, sir. In fact, some of our most significant tactical innovations came from conflicts between human nations and colonies. The techniques you saw today were developed fighting other humans who knew our capabilities and could adapt to counter them. A collective rustle of bioluminescent patterns swept through the Zephyrian observers as they processed this information. For species that typically achieved internal peace before expanding to the stars, the concept of continued intraspecies warfare was almost incomprehensible. Princess Lyrelay leaned forward, her fins bright with what Marcus now recognized as intellectual excitement. So you're saying that human military doctrine has been refined through constant testing against opponents who understand your tactics and can develop countermeasures? Exactly, Your Highness. Every time we develop a new strategy, someone else figures out how to beat it, so we have to develop something newer. It's been an ongoing arms race for thousands of years. The princess was quiet for a long moment, her fins cycling through colors Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, she spoke again, her voice thoughtful rather than commanding. Sergeant Chen, I have another question, and I hope you'll answer honestly even if the answer might be uncomfortable. She paused, meeting his eyes directly. Given what you've shown me today about human capabilities, how would your people perform in an actual battle against Korthak forces? Not a simulation, but real combat with real consequences. Marcus considered the question seriously. The honest answer was complex, involving factors that couldn't be simulated in a computer program. Fear, exhaustion, equipment failures. The psychological pressure of knowing that defeat meant the extinction of their species. All of these would affect human performance in ways that no simulation could accurately predict. But there was another factor that the simulation couldn't account for, one that might be even more important than tactical innovation or adaptive thinking. Your Highness, he said finally, in a real battle, human soldiers would have something that no simulation can replicate. We'd be fighting for the survival of our families, our children, our entire species. When humans fight for something that matters more than our own lives, we become capable of things that surprise even us. He gestured toward the tactical display where the recorded battle still showed human ships darting between much larger Korthak vessels. What you saw today was human tactical doctrine applied with professional competence. In a real battle fighting for our survival, you'd see something much more dangerous. Princess Lyrelay studied him for a long moment. Her fins settled into patterns he was beginning to recognize as deep respect. I believe you, Sergeant. And I believe that my mother was wise to offer your species protection. She straightened to her full height, resuming her formal demeanor. I will recommend to the High Council that humanity be granted full defensive alliance status, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. Thank you, Your Highness. You won't regret this decision. The princess's fins flashed with what he was learning to recognize as grim humor. Oh, I'm certain the Korthak will regret it. The question is whether they'll live long enough to learn from their mistake. The Korthak fleet arrived 18 hours earlier than predicted, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyria system, like a plague of mechanical locusts. Their ships formed the precise geometric patterns that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries, black and crimson hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets and burn stars. Marcus stood in the command center of the Zephyrian flagship Radiant Dawn, watching the tactical displays with the kind of calm that came from knowing that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Around him, Zephyrian officers moved with efficient urgency, their bioluminescent patterns painting the bridge in constantly shifting patterns of blue and green. Princess Lyrelay stood at the center of it all, her fins blazing with the steady gold pattern that indicated battlefield command mode. In the days since the simulation, she had thrown herself into studying human tactical doctrine, with the intensity of someone who had discovered a completely new branch of mathematics, Korthak. Fleet composition is confirmed, reported the sensor officer, his fins rippling with nervous energy. 167 assault vessels, 43 heavy cruisers, and 12 dreadnoughts. They're moving in standard attack formation toward the inner system. Marcus studied the enemy deployment and nodded approvingly. It was exactly what he had expected. Overwhelming force applied with mechanical precision, designed to crush any opposition through sheer firepower. Against conventional defenders, it would have been unstoppable. Unfortunately for the Korthak, they weren't facing conventional defenders. Allied fleet status? Princess Lyrelay asked. All ships report ready for combat, came the reply. 87 Zephyrian vessels and 24 human ships. The refugee civilian fleet has been moved to the protected anchorage behind Zephyria Prime. The numbers were still brutally unfavorable, more than 2 to 1 against, with the enemy holding a significant advantage in heavy ships. But Marcus had fought against worse odds before, and he had learned that numbers only mattered if you fought the kind of battle your enemy expected. Human fleet commanders report ready to implement Operation Loose Cannon, added the communications officer. Princess. Lyra Lee turned to Marcus with an expression that might have been amusement if it hadn't been quite so predatory. Operation Loose Cannon, Sergeant? I'm almost afraid to ask what that involves. Marcus allowed himself a slight smile. It's named after an old human expression, Your Highness. A loose cannon is something unpredictable and dangerous, especially to organized formations that can't adapt quickly to changing circumstances. And the Korthak certainly qualify as an organized formation, the princess mused. Very well, Sergeant. You've convinced me that human tactical doctrine has merit. Now let's see if it works against an enemy that isn't bound by the limitations of a computer simulation. The Korthak fleet continued its steady advance, their ships maintaining perfect formation as they closed with the inner system. Marcus watched their approach for 10 minutes, analyzing their deployment pattern and confirming his assessment of their tactical doctrine. Everything proceeded exactly as predicted until the two fleets came within long-range weapons distance. Then the human ships did something that no Korthak commander had ever seen before. They split up and ran away. All 24 human vessels suddenly broke formation and scattered in different directions, their engines burning at maximum power as they fled toward different parts of the system. To any observer, it looked like complete panic, a disorganized rout by forces that had taken one look at the enemy and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. The Korthak fleet immediately began adjusting their formation to pursue the fleeing humans, their rigid tactical doctrine demanding that they eliminate all threats before advancing on the main objective. It was exactly the response Marcus had been counting on. Zephyrian fleet, implement Defensive Protocol 7, Princess Lyrelei ordered. All ships maintain formation around the inner system perimeter. The Zephyrian vessels moved into a classic defensive shell, their heavy ships positioned to protect the critical infrastructure of their home system, while lighter vessels prepared to harass any enemy breakthrough. It was textbook defensive doctrine, exactly what the Korthak would expect from a civilized military force, which was why it was perfect bait for the trap Marcus had spent the last 3 days planning. The Korthak fleet pressed their attack, confident that they were facing enemies who would fight according to predictable patterns. Their assault vessels moved to engage the Zephyrian defensive line, while their heavy cruisers formed a reserve formation ready to exploit any breakthrough. The dreadnoughts held back, positioned to deliver the crushing blow once the initial assault had weakened the defenders. For 30 minutes, the battle proceeded exactly as Korthak tactical doctrine predicted. Their assault vessels hammered the Zephyrian defensive line with concentrated firepower, while the defenders responded with disciplined volleys from their heavy weapons. Ships on both sides took damage, but the Korthak maintained their numerical advantage and slowly began to push through the defensive perimeter. That was when the human ships returned. Marcus had scattered his forces to different parts of the system not to run away, but to position them for simultaneous attacks on multiple targets. While the Korthak fleet was focused on breaking through the Zephyrian defensive line, human destroyers emerged from behind asteroids, gas giant moons, and orbital stations to strike at the enemy's flanks and rear. The first indication the Korthak had that something was wrong came when their sensor arrays started going offline. Human ships, moving too fast for targeting computers designed to track conventional formations, darted through their ranks like sharks through a school of fish. Instead of trying to match firepower with firepower, they targeted command nodes, sensor clusters, and communication arrays. Enemy formation cohesion is breaking down, reported the sensor officer, his fins bright with excitement. The human attacks are disrupting their command structure. Marcus watched the tactical display with professional satisfaction as the Korthak fleet began to fragment. Individual ship commanders cut off from central coordination reverted to basic defensive protocols that left them vulnerable to the kind of coordinated strikes that Zephyrian heavy weapons could deliver. Princess, request permission to implement Phase 2, Marcus said. Princess Lyrelei's fins blazed with golden fire as she gave her approval. Granted, Sergeant. Show them what happens when they underestimate the alliance between our species, the Zephyrian defensive. Lines suddenly dissolved as their ships abandoned their positions and charged directly into the confused mass of the Korthak fleet. But instead of the chaotic melee that such a move would normally create, the Zephyrian vessels moved with perfect coordination, their attacks precisely timed to support the ongoing human harassment strikes. Where human destroyers had blinded enemy sensors, Zephyrian cruisers appeared to deliver devastating close-range bombardments. Where human ships had disabled enemy engines, Zephyrian fighters swarmed in to finish off immobilized targets. The two fleets fought not as separate forces but as a single organism, each species contributing their unique strengths to create something greater than the sum of their parts. The Korthak dreadnoughts, seeing their formation collapsing, attempted to restore order by moving forward to engage the largest Zephyrian ships directly. It was a reasonable tactical decision that would have worked against any conventional enemy. But Marcus had been waiting for exactly this move. All human ships. Implement Pattern Omega, he ordered. Every human vessel in the system suddenly converged on the advancing dreadnoughts, abandoning their harassment missions to focus on the enemy's most powerful units. They came from all directions simultaneously, their smaller size allowing them to slip through the defensive fire that would have stopped larger ships. The Korthak dreadnoughts found themselves surrounded by fast-moving targets that refused to engage in the kind of direct firepower exchange that would have favored the heavier ships. Instead, the human vessels focused on disabling specific systems, weapon mounts, shield generators, engine clusters, gradually reducing the mighty warships to helpless hulks. Princess Lyrelei watched the destruction of the Korthak fleet with something approaching awe. "Sergeant Chen," she said quietly, "I believe I'm beginning to understand why your species has survived so long against impossible odds." Marcus nodded, his attention still focused on the tactical display. "We've learned that when you can't win a fair fight, you don't fight fair. You change the rules until they work in your favor." The aftermath of the battle left the Zephyria system littered with the debris of what had once been the most feared fleet in the galaxy. Of the 222 Korthak ships that had entered the system, only 37 remained functional enough to attempt retreat. Even those were so badly damaged that most would never make it back to Korthak space. Marcus stood in the observation lounge of the Radiant Dawn, watching salvage crews work to clear shipping lanes of wreckage. The view was sobering. Even in victory, the cost had been significant. 15 Zephyrian ships had been destroyed and 8 more were so badly damaged they would require months of repair. The human losses were lighter. Only 3 destroyers lost, but that still represented nearly 15% of their remaining military assets. "Sergeant Chen," came a familiar voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Princess Lyrelei approaching, her fins displaying the complex patterns that indicated a mixture of emotions he was still learning to interpret. In the 3 days since the battle, she had spent most of her time in debriefing sessions with her military advisors, analyzing every aspect of the engagement to understand how such a decisive victory had been possible. "Your Highness," he replied, straightening to attention. "Please, just Lyrelei," she said, moving to stand beside him at the observation window. "I think we've moved beyond formal protocols, don't you?" Marcus relaxed slightly, though he maintained his respectful posture. Over the past week, his relationship with the princess had evolved from mutual hostility to something approaching professional respect. He wasn't sure he would call it friendship yet, but it was certainly better than being viewed as a primitive specimen. "The High Council has finished reviewing the battle reports," Lyrelei continued. "The decision was unanimous. Humanity is to be granted full membership in the Zephyrian Empire, with all rights and privileges thereof." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. Full membership meant protection for the refugee populations, access to Zephyrian technology and trade networks, and most importantly, a guarantee that his species would survive whatever other threats the galaxy might hold. "That's wonderful news," he said, genuinely grateful. "Thank you for advocating for us." Lyrelei's fins shifted to patterns that Marcus had learned indicated mild embarrassment. "Actually, I did very little advocating. After the battle, the Council was quite convinced of humanity's value without any persuasion from me." She paused, studying the debris field outside. "In fact, several Council members suggested that perhaps we should be asking to join the Human Alliance rather than the other way around." Marcus raised an eyebrow at that. I'm not sure we're quite ready to be the senior partner in a galactic alliance. We're still figuring out how to manage our own refugee crisis. Perhaps, Lyreley replied. But you've demonstrated capabilities that no other species in our experience possesses. The way your people fought in that battle, it wasn't just tactical innovation. It was something deeper than that. She turned to face him directly, her multifaceted eyes reflecting his image in dozens of tiny fragments. I've been studying human history since our first encounter, trying to understand what makes your species so different. Do you know what I discovered? Marcus shook his head, curious to hear an alien perspective on humanity's development. Every other spacefaring species we've encountered has followed essentially the same path, Lyreley explained. They achieve planetary unity, develop interstellar travel, expand to nearby systems, and then settle into stable, peaceful growth. Conflicts are rare and usually resolved through negotiation or economic pressure. She gestured toward the debris field. But humans never stopped fighting. Even after achieving space travel, you continued to wage wars against each other. Your military technology advanced not because you needed to defend against alien threats, but because you needed to defend against other humans who were just as innovative and determined as you were. Marcus nodded slowly. It's not something we're particularly proud of. A lot of people died in those conflicts. I'm not suggesting you should be proud of the wars themselves, Lyreley clarified. But the result is a species that understands conflict in ways that peaceful races simply cannot. When the Korthak fleet arrived, my people responded exactly as our doctrine prescribed, with disciplined defensive formations and coordinated firepower. It's a sensible approach that has served us well for millennia. Her fins rippled with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as fascination, mixed with respect. But your people looked at the same situation and saw opportunities for deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare. You understood that the Korthak's greatest strength, their rigid, tactical discipline, could be turned into a weakness if you could disrupt their command structure and force them to improvise. Marcus considered her words carefully. You're saying that our history of internal conflict gave us an advantage in understanding how to fight an external enemy? More than that, Lyreley replied. I'm saying that your species has developed a form of strategic thinking that no other race possesses. You don't just plan for victory. You plan for victory against opponents who know your capabilities and are actively trying to counter them. She pulled up a holographic display showing the battle from 3 days ago, the tactical movements playing out in miniature between them. Watch how your destroyers move during the initial phase. They're not just scattering randomly. Each ship is positioning itself to support attacks that won't begin for another 20 minutes. Your commanders were thinking 6 moves ahead while accounting for how the enemy would respond to each previous move. Marcus studied the display, seeing patterns in the human ship movements that he hadn't noticed during the actual battle. Lyreley was right. There was a level of strategic depth to the human tactics that went beyond simple innovation. The Korthak have conquered 47 star systems using the same basic tactics, Lyreley continued. No one has ever been able to defeat them because no one has ever forced them to adapt to truly unpredictable opposition. She paused the holographic replay at the moment when the human ships began their coordinated return. Until now, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So what happens next? With the Korthak threat reduced, I mean. Lyreley's fins shifted to patterns that Marcus interpreted as cautious optimism, mixed with something that might have been anticipation. That depends largely on your people, Sergeant. The Council has authorized me to make you an offer. She manipulated the holographic display, replacing the battle scene with a star map showing the local galactic region. Hundreds of systems were marked with different colored indicators, representing various species and political entities. This is our local galactic neighborhood, Lyreley explained. 43 different species, most of them peaceful traders and explorers. But there are threats out there beyond the Korthak. Raider fleets, rogue AI networks, species that view other forms of life as resources to be exploited. She highlighted several systems with red markers. These are known problem areas, regions where conventional military doctrine has proven inadequate. The Council believes that human tactical expertise could be invaluable in addressing these threats. Marcus studied the star map with growing understanding. You're offering us a role as military advisors to the Empire? More than advisors, Lyreley corrected. Partners. A joint human Zephyrian fleet with unified command structure and shared tactical doctrine. Your people would provide strategic innovation, while we provide the industrial base and logistical support. The scope of what she was proposing began to sink in. Not just survival for humanity, but a chance to become a major player in galactic politics. It was more than Marcus had dared to hope for when they first arrived as desperate refugees. There is one condition, Lirelei added, her fins showing patterns that Marcus interpreted as slightly nervous anticipation. What's that? The Council has requested that you personally serve as the military liaison between our species. You would hold the rank of fleet commander in the Imperial Navy, with authority over both human and Zephyrian units. Marcus blinked in surprise. Your Highness, Lirelei, I'm honored, but I'm just a sergeant. I don't have the qualifications to command a fleet. Lirelei's fins flashed with what he now recognized as amusement. Sergeant, you just defeated the most feared military force in the galaxy, using tactics that no one thought possible. I think your qualifications speak for themselves. Marcus looked out at the debris field again, thinking about the responsibility being offered to him. It wasn't just about military command. It was about representing humanity in a wider galaxy and helping to shape the future of interstellar relations. I'll need to consult with my superiors, he said finally. Of course, Lirelei replied. But Sergeant, Marcus, I hope you'll seriously consider the offer. I believe this partnership could benefit both our species immensely. As she walked away, Marcus continued to stare out at the stars, thinking about how much had changed since that first confrontational encounter on the patrol perimeter. Princess Lirelei had learned that humanity was far more than primitive mammals playing at civilization. And perhaps more importantly, he had learned that even the most advanced species could recognize and respect true capability when they saw it. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, the first ship of the joint human-Zephyrian fleet to be commissioned under the new alliance. The vessel itself was a testament to the partnership between the two species. Human tactical systems integrated with Zephyrian engineering, creating something that was greater than either could have achieved alone. Through the viewports, he could see the construction yards of New Geneva Station, where dozens of similar vessels were taking shape. The refugee camps that had once housed desperate human survivors had been transformed into bustling colonies, their populations now contributing to the industrial and scientific capabilities of the expanded empire. Fleet Commander Chen to the bridge, came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Marcus still felt a slight jolt of surprise every time he heard his new rank. The promotion from sergeant to fleet commander had been the fastest advancement in human military history. But as Admiral Rodriguez had pointed out, they were living in unprecedented times. Status report, Marcus requested as he took his position at the Central Command Station. All ships report ready for departure, replied Commander Sarah Mitchell, his human second in command. The Zephyrian contingent confirms their vessels are prepared for hyperspace transition. Marcus nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication channel. This is Fleet Commander Chen to all ships. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. 6 months ago, humanity arrived in Zephyrian space as refugees fleeing an unstoppable enemy. Today we depart as partners in the largest peacekeeping force this region has ever seen. On his tactical display, he could see the assembled fleet, 24 human vessels working in perfect coordination with 36 Zephyrian ships. Each crew had trained together, learning to blend their respective tactical doctrines into something entirely new. Our mission is to respond to a distress call from the Altarian Republic, Marcus continued. Their colonies in the Vega sector are under attack by raiders using captured Korthak technology. This will be our first real test as an integrated force, and I have complete confidence in every person serving in this fleet. He switched to a private channel to address Princess Lirelei, who was commanding the Zephyrian contingent from her flagship, the Stellar Harmony. Over the past months, their professional relationship had evolved into something approaching genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. Ready when you are, partner, came Lirellei's voice, using the informal address they had adopted for joint operations. Marcus smiled at her tone. The formal, condescending princess he had first encountered was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to value competence over pedigree and results over protocol. Initiating hyperspace transition in 30 seconds. All ships prepare for jump. The fleet disappeared into hyperspace with the kind of coordinated precision that would have been impossible without months of intensive training. Marcus used the travel time to review the intelligence reports from the Altarian system, studying the tactical situation they would face upon arrival. The raiders were using modified Korthak vessels, ships salvaged from the fleet they had destroyed 6 months ago. It was a sobering reminder that their victory had consequences beyond the immediate tactical situation. Dangerous technology was now in the hands of groups with no compunctions about using it against civilian targets. "Hyperspace transition complete," announced the navigation officer. "Altarian system dead ahead." The tactical display immediately populated with contact indicators as the fleet's sensors began cataloging what they found. Marcus studied the data with growing concern. The raider force was larger than expected, and their ships showed modifications that suggested someone with significant technical expertise was backing them. "Fleet Commander," reported the sensor operator, "I'm reading 43 hostile vessels in 3 separate groups. They're using Korthak-derived weapons but with improved power systems and enhanced shielding." Marcus frowned as he analyzed the enemy deployment. The raiders weren't just using salvaged Korthak ships. They were improving them. That suggested either captured Korthak personnel or another species with advanced military technology. "Lyrelai, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" he asked over the private channel. "Confirmed," came her reply, her voice tight with concern. "Those modifications aren't random. Someone with detailed knowledge of Korthak engineering has been upgrading their vessels." Before Marcus could respond, the communication officer interrupted with an urgent report. "Fleet Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the lead raider vessel. They're demanding our immediate withdrawal from the system." "Put them through," Marcus ordered. The main view screen activated to show a figure that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was clearly Korthak, the distinctive reptilian. Features and bronze-colored skin were unmistakable, but this one wore the elaborate, ceremonial armor of a high-ranking commander. "I am War Prime Thaxis of the Korthak Imperium," the figure announced, in heavily accented but understandable English. "You are trespassing in territory claimed by right of conquest. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The Korthak fleet they had defeated hadn't been an isolated force. It had been part of a larger strategic operation. And now the survivors were regrouping, using captured technology and raider allies to continue their expansion. "This is Fleet Commander Chen of the Human Zephyrian Alliance," Marcus replied. "The Altarian Republic has requested our assistance in defending their territory from unlawful aggression. We're here under the authority of the Galactic Peace Accords." War Prime Thaxis's expression shifted to what Marcus interpreted as amusement mixed with disdain. "Ah, the famous human commander who destroyed our expeditionary force through trickery and cowardice. How fitting that you should be here to witness the beginning of our revenge." The transmission cut off, and Marcus immediately began issuing orders. "All ships, battle stations, implement dispersal pattern Omega-7. This is not going to be like our previous engagement." As the fleet moved into combat formation, Marcus found himself facing a completely different tactical situation. The Korthak had learned from their defeat, and their raider allies provided them with the kind of tactical flexibility that had been humanity's main advantage. "Fleet Commander," came Lyrelai's voice over the comm. "Enemy forces are splitting into multiple groups. They're not maintaining their traditional formations." Marcus watched the tactical display with growing respect for his opponent. War Prime Thaxis had studied the battle that destroyed his fleet and learned from it. Instead of relying on overwhelming force applied through rigid formations, he was using smaller, more flexible groups that could adapt to changing circumstances. "Interesting," Marcus murmured. "They're trying to beat us at our own game. Can they?" asked Commander Mitchell. Marcus studied the enemy movements for another moment, then activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, this is Fleet Commander Chen. The enemy has adapted their tactics based on our previous engagement. They're expecting us to rely on the same strategies that worked against conventional Korthak forces." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "Fortunately for us, human tactical doctrine has never been about repeating successful strategies. It's about staying one step ahead of anyone trying to counter them. All ships implement Protocol Pandora. Show them what happens when they try to outthink the species that invented asymmetrical warfare. As the two fleets closed with each other, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first encounter with Princess Lyrelei. Humanity had gone from desperate refugees to respected partners in a galactic alliance. But more importantly, they had found their place in a wider universe, not as conquerors or subjects, but as the species that could think outside the box when everyone else was trapped inside it. The battle that followed would become the subject of study in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. But for Marcus, standing on the bridge of his flagship as human and Zephyrian crews worked together with perfect coordination, it represented something even more significant. It was proof that sometimes the best way to earn respect in the universe was to show that you couldn't be predicted, couldn't be categorized, and couldn't be defeated by anyone who tried to put you in a box marked primitive. Species War Prime Thaxus was about to learn why underestimating humanity's capacity for innovation was a mistake that most species only made once. And Princess Lyrelei, commanding her own ships with tactics she had learned from human instructors, was about to prove that the partnership between their species was stronger than any force in the galaxy.